panel. So I'm going to introduce you to the moderator of this panel, and she will introduce the other members of the panel and take the discussion forward. She works as an inspirational speaker, catalyst, digital strategist, and CEO at Ziggy Creative Colony. She's firmly convinced that new possibilities also imply new responsibilities for all of us. As a digital strategist, she views the Internet of Things and the digital revolution as a great opportunity to decrease harmful consumption while still increasing growth. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Darja Isaksson.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's been fantastic listening to Rachel. Huge inspiration and mind-blowing possibilities of a new future. So I have the opportunity to manage this panel, and I would like to introduce two more speakers. We're going to talk a bit about humane cities. As more and more of us are already living in cities, and more of the human populations are moving to cities, it has a lot to do with our future. What would a truly humane city be based on new kinds of possibilities? So I would like to invite Alexander Bard and Johan Lindefors to the stage. Please come. And before we start, just quickly, I think most of you here in the audience, you know Alexander, artist, philosopher, writer of the Futurica Trilogy.
Yes, I've just had the Futurica Trilogy published in the US, and it's doing really well. So if you Google Futurica and Trilogy, you'll find it. It's a great thing about having a book title you can Google right away. Yeah.
And my quick question to you is, you seem to be on this mission on kind of making people think about the profound change we're going through. Why is this so important to you? Obviously not for fame.
Well, Rachel has a passion for materials and rethinking materials, and I have a passion for rethinking communication. So what I'm doing is that I'm looking into what the internet is doing to us, and we're constantly underrating the effects of the internet and of constant communication between people around the planet. And I think these two things actually meet. When we're going to discuss what kind of cities we want to live in the future, we have to both take Rachel's perspective of rethinking materials, and we have to take the perspective of rethinking communication. And where the two meet is where we can create something really meaningful.
Right. And Joel, you work as a communication strategist and also kind of a sustainability forerunner. So it would be very interesting to hear also what's kind of your momentum into this? What's your sustainability story? Why are you doing this?
Yeah. I come originally from a quite radical activist environment. First as an environmental activist and later on as a labor rights activist, and focusing on several of the problems and the challenges that we face today. But I kind of got fed up with that and wanted to instead promote the solutions and try to find how we can ways of getting forward. So that's why we founded this Futerra, the communication agency I'm working for a couple of years ago.
And that's fantastic. And Rachel, you're already very active sharing your ideas. And in 2 words, on why is this important to you, being a TED Fellow and sharing ideas here? What do you see as kind of your...
Well, I mean, I think, you know, again, you know, I absolutely agree about the need for communication, because I think to create sustained creative change requires all of us, or, you know, people to work together, essentially. You know, without that, we don't have anything.
Okay, so we'll get back to that. This is practically the reason why this is the start of an interdisciplinary workshop that will take place during lunchtime, where more people will share their thoughts also, and we will have some discussions. So I hope many of you will be there. And the topic, as I mentioned, is humane cities. So let's just start there. What would a concept of a humane city mean to you, Rachel?
Well, for me, you know, a humane city rests on the idea of a reading of the human in the 21st century. So, and I think we're actually at a time, you know, culturally, you know, with, cultural theory, you know, moving along with an idea of a human in response to a 20th century in which we've imagined ourselves as machines. You know, since the Enlightenment, you know, we imagine ourselves as bodies that are made up of body parts. You know, we're kind of stitched together. They're replaceable. And in fact, we imagine ourselves to be so machine-like in some ways that Ray Kurzweil, you know, proposes that we're actually going to become machines. machines, because in that way we won't fall apart because we're just a collection of little bits. Well, I don't buy into that. Since certainly the early 90s, and obviously before then, there's been a series of ideas. Haraway and Jane Bennett and Myra Hurd and Emma Goulis. They're all proposing that essentially we're not machines, we're sets of nested ecologies. So the 21st century human is a set of ecologies. So we're not just the 46 chromosomes and the bones and flesh that come from that. We're actually also communities of bacteria which live in our guts and change our moods by producing fatty acids. They form our immune system, so they keep away bad bacteria and they like friendly bacteria. That's why we drink those little milk drinks and keep our tummies all nice and happy as a community. Also, we have viruses in our DNA, but it goes beyond the body. I mean, so people like Timothy Morton start talking about hyper-objects, and in a sense that, dust is a hyper-object, in that it's a thing that creates an effect, but it's distributed in lots of different places. But we have hyper-organs. So if we think about trees and green plants, they're actually making the oxygen that we breathe. So if we get rid of all the trees and green plants, and photosynthetic bacteria, where is our breathing going to come from? So in other words, the idea about how we work as human and who we are, starts to impact on what actually then humane is. And for me, we haven't really started doing that. We do have bioartists, like Sonja Baumel, who are talking about bacterial skins. Well, I think we need to really think about what we mean when we design for a community. Are we just designing for people? I would like the answer to that to be no, we're not. But if we're not, then who are we designing for when we're designing a community? Do we include pigeons and rats and pestilence and plague? They're all biological. I mean, so essentially, obviously, we don't really want too many of those. But we also can't barrier them out. So essentially, we need community strategies that help us edit our networks and our ecologies, and this is why it's a continual engagement rather than establishing geometries, that can be transgressed. This sounds kind of complex, but I don't think it is. I think it is much more thinking in terms of agrarianism, not going down the monoculture lines, but how do we actually work with natural systems, and how do we actually set up conditions in which abundance and thriving are possible?
I can see, you mentioned before this about decentralizing humanity and not focusing on us. Yeah. So I understand that would be a central part of a humane city to you. Joel, what would kind of your take on that be? What would you?
Yeah, maybe I'm a little bit more anthropocentric then, I guess. But a humane city, a city is of course an integrated city. A city is also it's a lot about distribution of spaces. So I would say that a humane city for me is, for example, a city with free public transport, and very easy to go from one place to another, just because of the integration. I would say something like that. And also to let up spaces for new types of, in the future, for new types of, I think we will have to see much more collaborative, for example, production, collaborative creativity, but also collaborative consumption. And to some extent, public transport is a type of collaborative consumption.
So on a philosophical level, expanding our entire idea of who we're doing it for, and on a very practical level, completely new ways of collaborating and using a city as humans, which we still will be. Alexander, I know you have ideas about
the
this.
problem with us human beings is that, for example, I take my smartphone. It's actually very easy for us to adapt to new technologies and use them, contrary to most people believe. But for example, my mom is 78 years old, and she called me triumphantly last week and told me she'd thrown away all her ugly CDs because she got Spotify at home and she can listen to jazz music on Spotify, and she's 78 years old. So she got some stuffed African monkeys to put in her living room instead of those ugly CD piles, That is rethinking because you're using new technologies, and that we're used to. And we actually adapt to technologies very easily that way. The problem is, though, that rethinking technology and rethinking materials, rethinking this in the city takes innovative thinking. It takes imagination. So it's not just an adaptation to something that's already happened. And this is where we human beings lack all the time. And I think what Rachel is talking about here is the fact that our thinking is stuck in the 1850s. And the 1850s was the time when Europe expanded and became industrial, and we built factories, and we traveled to these factories. We commuted 5 or 6 days a week to work, and then we went back again. Now, every city on the planet has to be redesigned over the next 20 to 30 years, because we're not going to live like that anymore. We don't commute anymore in that way to work, because we work from home, we work from anywhere. We don't even have a home anymore. My home is where my laptop is, you know. I don't care where on the planet I am. As long as my laptop is close to me, that's my home. Because we live online. I will literally live online. And I think, to give you a good literary tip here, because you read, all of you read, and I think where both Rachel and Joe and I come from is that stop reading Plato and Descartes. You know, Descartes and the Enlightenment philosophers were good at the time, but basically the society we built based on René Descartes' vision of the world was the industrial age, where the taming of physical materials and turning human beings into machines was an ideal. Now, that's a rotten idea for us now. It doesn't work anymore because we live in a completely different environment with completely different new possibilities. So read fucking Gilles Deleuze, you know. Read the greatest thinker of the 20th century, because we're increasingly going to live in a Deleuzian age. And I think Rachel would agree with me that that's a great prophet to start from. So don't start reading the Greeks when you do philosophy. You need to do philosophy, as you understand now. Start with the great thinkers of the late 20th century that actually looked into the future and saw where we're heading, and saw that the enormous possibilities we have to redesign things by communicating with and interacting with nature are just fantastic. But we have to stop thinking of ourselves as machines. We have to literally start thinking of ourselves as networks. The internet is not about a technology, it's not about smartphones and laptops. It's about rethinking the world and rethinking what it means to be a human being, and seeing not individuals. Now, individuals don't exist. Just like God does not exist. You as an individuals do not exist. The only thing that exists are networks per se, relations. There are no individuals, there are no human beings left, they're just networks. And if you start thinking that way, you will think fresh and you will become much more innovative. There you go.
Thank you. I think what you all seem to have in common, coming from different perspectives, is really firing up on the fact that we need to redefine a lot about how we think, about how we talk. You're talking about concepts like sea of entangled networks, and my brain has a meltdown trying to put this into practical use. So for these things, just a few comments on why is this so important, and what are kind of the concepts. You've already mentioned quite a few that we just need to kill, and quite a few more that we need to kind of embrace. If you would say a little bit more on that, why is that so important, and what do we need to focus on that?
I think I'd be disingenuous if I said, you know, we have to do away with, you know, the mechanical age, because, you know, it did get us, you know, we're standing on shoulders of giants, as it were, even though that's a misquote of an, anyway. That what we really need is a kind of succession, you know, a way of defining where a machine is actually an appropriate solution, but actually having a much broader range of other strategies that we can use when machines aren't the right solution. And right now, we just have machines, and okay, we've got a bit of wireless, and you know, and I think one of the most important things that has happened, you know, in the 20th century has been the internet and this you know, global connectedness. But we need to change that portfolio. And I think one of the things that the machine age has given us is this idea that we can predict the future, this determinism. You know, we feel really insecure if we don't know what's going to happen next. And we devote all this computing power and, you know, algorithms to try and figure out how to predict the future. I think that we need to kind of, you know, relax about that. And, you know, read Ilya Prigogine, for example. It talks about the end of certainty, you know, and says, hang on, you know, okay, you know, the future may not be predictable in the way that we've been used to in a Newtonian, you know, geometric universe. But that's okay, because it's a lot more creative. You know, and when you actually bring things together, you know, you can surprise yourself as the possibilities. And I think that's actually the phase that we're at. I think the more we think deterministically, the more insular and individualized we become. And I think that's really alienating us as a species. You know, and I think this, you know, this is why these kinds of conversations and environments are really cool, because it is actually about really reconnecting, not just because we can go to Facebook and, you know, see a mirror version of ourselves in there and, you know, do a vanity Google surf or something, but actually because we're actually interested in what else is happening, and then rematerialize all that, incredible sets of ideas and do a mashup. There's a fantastic lady called Isabel Stengers. She wrote a lot with Ilya Prigozhin, and she believes in a technique called constructivism. So that's not Russian monumentalization that's pre-industrial era. What it is people with radically different skill sets, cultural backgrounds, getting together and working on a level playing field, so that each individual actually advances their practice by listening and working with other people towards a common goal. And this is a really incredible creative practice. It gets rid of hierarchies of order, which normally has science at the top right now, but maybe in C.P. Snow's day it would be the literati, and actually puts people together on an equal playing field, to actually forge a creative, instructive conversation. And I think that this constructivist approach to conversation and problem solving is actually a really interesting, technique to use. I'm sure there are plenty more out there, but I guess my plea is let's diversify and speciate, our approaches to problem solving, and not just homogenize and shoot towards carbon counts and big computers with little green wigs on as the solution to sustainability, which is a better kind of manufacturing.
So, and listening to that, like the possibilities of actually having a completely new way of looking at the city and the organisms in there and ourselves and all this new, a criticism that I would kind of expect would be, okay, this all sounds very fancy. It's like enormously different society and architecture and new philosophical concepts and everything, but are we dealing with the real issues here? What would your response be to a concerned person worrying that we're actually wasting our time then, rather than dealing with the realities of here and now?
No, but I think we do. Actually, our ability to meet the future challenges is just about a mindset. I mean, because we are facing huge challenges. We have the climate change. We have still for a couple of decades increasing global population. We do have peak oil, we have peak phosphor, we have peak cotton, we have peak everything, which kind of creates this wall that we are heading against as a civilization and as a species. And the ability, and when we hit that wall, either we go up or we go down. And right now you can see a survivalist movement all around the world that kind of prepare to go down. But we really need to go up, and that's just about our mindset. And then we can see a lot of different examples. I mean, from like just fair trade coffee or organic cotton and stuff like that, to more concepts like Rachel are talking about, or cradle to cradle, or concepts like circular economy, or biomimicry for that sake, which you can see as stepping stones in this wall. And through that, you can get on the top of it. And that's also business opportunities, of course. So for an entrepreneur, there are a lot of different steps to take already.
Alexander, I know that you also have some rather strong opinions about this. Which concepts do we need to redefine apart from individuals and from this perspective of here and now?
Well,
which are the most important ones?
I'm not moralizing. I'm not saying you have to change, people will change. And fortunately, there are lots of cities on the planet. And we can go to different cities and they do things differently from us and do it better, and we can then copy. So all it takes is just a huge competition, loads of cities around the world, and a population that's actually very mobile, because they will move to great cities and move away from the bad ones. And that's exactly the kind of freedom I'm looking for here right now. We're stuck in the nation state. Most of you in the room are Swedish citizens, so you have to follow what Fredrik Reinfeldt decides for you, and you hate that. But when it comes to cities, and cities are becoming more powerful, and nation states are slowly evaporating, we can actually move. We can just get up on our butt. If you can't take drugs in Stockholm, go to Berlin and have a party. We all do that. So, you can just move. And that's the great thing. That's an opportunity, because it means all it takes is for one city on the planet to take on Rachel's great ideas of doing materials differently. And if they then find out something that works, then people actually adapt very quickly to it. And that's the great thing about human beings. We can adapt quickly to something once we see it in front of us. But it's you stop preparing yourself for the change, let the change happen, and then just trust the fact your psychologist is actually trained to adapt to it once it's there. That's exactly why you got their iPad there. It didn't exist 3 years ago, and you love it, Darja. It's half your life right now. You say, adaptation is easy. So competition is key. and adaptation is there. In competition, multitude is all about competition. It's about a friendly, creative type of competition. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, let 1,000 cities bloom. In other words, just go around the world and see what other cities are doing. And right now, maybe Stockholm is not the most innovative place on the planet, but we can go to other places and we can learn.
So now that we're moving into the actual workshop where we will meet, and this entire conference is a typical place where we're now meeting with, as we hear, kind of different perspectives on things. Is this type of meeting, how is it important, or is it mainly fun, or is it a key, what should I say, tool in order to find these new mindsets, tool sets, frameworks that I hear that we are so desperate to find, but it's so difficult to kind of formulate them right now?
Yeah, I actually think it is absolutely essential that these kinds of meetings take place. And I just want to address your question about, by creating new frameworks for thinking, are we just fiddling whilst Rome burns? Why aren't we saving carbon? Why aren't we, making a building that's zero energy and stuff? Well, the thing is that we're running off and, jumping the gun with solutions to these deterministic futures that we think we're solving because we're panicking, and actually, the more panic that we have and the more kind of knee-jerk reaction to do something about it, I think that's the more time that we're going to get it wrong. And so I think that these environments where we actually get a chance to actually think about our thinking, and that is the first step. That is the issue that we need to address. We need to think about our own sets of thinking, our own fears, our own responsibilities. What unites us in a secular age? Do we actually trust humanity anymore? I mean, I love people. I mean, but, we were having a conversation last night where, in an urban environment, we trust people less than we do, say, when we're in a rural environment. What's going on there? I think there's some really, really fundamental questions that start to create value in a way that, just looking at the economic, parameters that we currently look at, are just not addressing. There's a really big humane issue here, and it's no good saying we're going to put these projections to 2050 and, maybe 30% of the population is just going to die because, we can't possibly, manage all that. But that's profound, right? I mean, if you're saying we can't manage all these, solutions, then, what are we doing about that? I mean, Peter Diamandis gave a great talk on TED about abundance, and he kind of left this big gap between now, 3 billion minds going online, great, fantastic solutions here, but there was this big gap, in which catastrophe was going to sit. And that's the bit that I think that we really need to not just walk away from and sidestep and go, oh, well, the Western world has zero carbon buildings. There are huge questions here, and we're skipping around all of them.
And that's why I think one of the topics for...
there's a scary word here called metaphysics. We need a new metaphysical foundation, and Joel and I are both in the synthist movement, and that's one of many attempts to do that, because we need a bigger explanation, a bigger grasp of what's going on, so we can see the world as a world. And synthism is an example. It's Deleuzian metaphysics, basically. We can replace both religion and humanism with something better. Because otherwise we will be stuck in the humanist paradigm and still think humanism, and we'll come up with all the wrong ideas, wrong solutions, we'll not think ahead and not see the possibilities here.
I'm extremely happy I will get the chance to listen to you all discussing this even more in the workshop. And it seems like, because one of the things you will discuss then is how do we create more engagement in these cities where we are living. And I do feel that engagement is one of the things that you're saying. We need to get this engagement going in order to make the steps necessary that we all understand. We can't see exactly which ones they are. We have to find them along the way through this. So very much looking forward for the continued workshop, and I hope to see a lot of people there also. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darja. That was, wow, mind-bending. I've got, when you start a new sport and the muscles in your body hurting that you didn't know existed, like I found out when I tried to surf last week, apparently there are muscles in between your ribs, and they hurt when you're fat and you try to surf. And right now I'm feeling parts of my brain lighting up that I wasn't sure were there. So thank you very much to our panel. We have, Give him another round of applause. I think we have gifts for each of you as well, so we'll sort that out later.